Oh hey, it's a card with Gian Vellante headlining the prelims and Montana De La Rosa holding a spot on the main card. Yeah, I think a better use of our time would be going back and looking at one of my favourite performances in the title fight in recent history. This is a brief look into a masterclass. In this instance, we're looking at Joanna Jędrzejczyk and her emphatic win over Jessica Andrade back at UFC 211. Everything about this performance from Jędrzejczyk was impressive. Her combination work offensively was brutal and damaging, her jab was long and constant, her kicking game bemused her opponent, her posts and head movement to avoid Andrade's patented left hook were effective from the onset. But ultimately, the key to this matchup was the footwork. We've talked about on multiple occasions the value of both offensive and defensive ring craft. From an offensive perspective, we want to pin our opponent onto the fence and exploit their lack of space. With less space to utilise, our opponent has fewer options. They can't back up to avoid a combination since the fence stops their withdrawal. Thus, by moving laterally and cutting off their escape, hence the term ring cutting, we aid our offensive efforts. From a defensive perspective, unless your name is Tyron Woodley, we want to avoid being forced against the cage. Due to the reasons we just touched on, it gives us fewer tools to utilise. Avoiding the fence is, like many things in combat sports, an imperfect art, but ultimately, it all comes down to distance management, timing, and deceptive footwork. Jędrzejczyk's performance against Andrade exemplifies all of these attributes. After some rough exchanges with Andrade in the pocket early in the first round, Joanna was forced to really take stock of her defensive footwork. Her game plan was clear from the very onset: punish Andrade's legs throughout the bout to make it harder for her to blitz as the fight would wear her on. Andrade came into the contest presumably aware of what Jędrzejczyk's approach would involve, and the earlier exchanges were notable for Andrade closing the distance as Joanna would throw her low kicks. After being pushed to the fence and taken down with a high crotch, Joanna clearly needed to avoid Andrade placing her on the fence, where the takedown threat was most present. After separating, Jędrzejczyk's game started to come alive. As she pumped her jab out, Andrade started showcasing her two most common responses: pulling back at the waist and attempting to parry. Both are usually, as a brawler, solid responses to an opponent's jab, as both mean that she doesn't often have to bounce back to avoid fire. Instead, she can keep her feet planted, avoid shots up top using the pullback or the parry, and then immediately jump into the pocket and fire off her hooks. It seems clear that Andrade recognises how this style leaves her open to low kicks, and that's why she tried to counter them so diligently early on in this bout. But it's a lot easier to counter low kicks when you actually know that it's a low kick coming. With Joanna flicking her jab out so often, and then subsequently feinting the jab to draw responses, Andrade became increasingly susceptible to the low kick. Her response was to do what brawlers often do when they can't read their opponent's game well: load up on the lead hooks and bull rush. Andrade is hoping that this will back Joanna up to the cage, and from there, she can do work. In this exchange, we have a jab feint that draws an attempted parry, which leads into Andrade telegraphing a wild left hook that Joanna slides out of the way of. Watch how, as Joanna evades the hook, she purposefully moves out to her right and establishes control over the centre of the cage. This is good defensive ring craft. She doesn't just pull back aimlessly, she moves away from the cage, using her opponent's momentum as a gauge for when to do so. Here's another example. Joanna lands her outside low kick, and as Andrade tries to counter with a doubled up right hook left hook, Jędrzejczyk gets her chin behind her lead shoulder and slyly moves out to her right. Here, Joanna plays the matador, rocking back and forth before firing off her jab and circling to her right. As Andrade loads her left hook, a slight hesitation from Joanna prompts Andrade to throw, and Joanna glides away to her right, returning safely to the centre of the cage. As the fight wore on, in spite of getting caught on a number of occasions, as is inevitable against Andrade, Joanna just kept playing the matador like a true seasoned pro. Here, she's been pushed slightly closer to the cage than she would otherwise like, so she throws an outside low kick and moves off to her left, off of the kick. We see her distance management tools come out as Andrade gets more aggressive. Most consistently throughout the bout, we see her post on Andrade's shoulders to mitigate the length of that powerful left hook. Watch here as she pumps her jab, and to avoid either the counter hook or the takedown attempt, posts on the shoulder, before skipping backwards and cutting back to the centre of the cage. Here, the The off-tempo 1-2 is followed by Jędrzejczyk posting the lead hand on the shoulder, and subsequently, Andrade's left hook doesn't have anywhere near the amount of reach and power it would have otherwise. Another form of distance management that Joanna employs often involves closing the distance. As Andrade flurries in, we see Jędrzejczyk using single or double collar ties to redirect her opponent into empty space so that she can escape. Here, she uses the single collar tie to push Andrade into the fence and away from her. Whilst she does end up eating the overhand right, it's a decent trade-off for being stuck on the fence. Here, she disrupts the posture of Andrade with the double collar tie, while also using it to land knees, and then she pushes off to her left and returns to the centre of the cage. As the fight wore on and Joanna did tire to some extent, there were occasions where she elected not to circle out, but instead exchange in the pocket. Here, as Andrade lets her hands fly, Joanna plants her feet and pops a mean jab to snap Andrade's head back. Round 4 and 5 was where we saw the straight right show up prolifically, as she used it to counter Andrade's insistent pressure. Here, as Andrade loads her shot, Jędrzejczyk cracks her with a straight right that she doesn't see coming. The post on the face allows her to move off to her left without taking any more shots in the exchange. Here, as Andrade marches forward, Joanna plants her feet and throws the right hand. It doesn't do a whole lot to stop Andrade's forward momentum, given she's an absolute tank, but it looks damn good to a judge, and it starts to wear down the brawler nevertheless. Ultimately, Joanna dominated the contest. She got caught in the pocket with some significant shots and spent some time defending takedowns on the cage, but her veteran savvy kept her safe from the worst of Andrade's strikes, and her consistent offense meant that she was awarded every round by every judge, including a 10-8 in the fourth according to Sal D'Amato. But beyond the flashy high kicks and brutal 1-2s, which, were all pretty cool, don't get me wrong, Joanna's best work came in the form of footwork, feints, and sheer variety. A jab will be followed by a low kick followed by a high kick, a 1-2 followed by a push kick. There were times she even switched southpaw just to open up that left high kick from the open side. In the midst of these combinations, Joanna is constantly feinting to draw responses and then capitalising on what she sees. If you haven't seen the full fight before, I would implore you to look it up as soon as possible. In spite of the lopsided scoring and relative dominance by Joanna, it's a fascinating fight with plenty of highlights. Regardless of whether Joanna ever manages to secure the belt back, it's safe to say that with this performance in her pocket, she should and will be forever respected by the MMA community. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoy this kind of content, like and subscribe, and I'll look to put more out in the coming weeks.